Democrats aren't exactly thrilled with President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. We sat down with Congressman Joe Kennedy to hear more about his concerns and why he says the Senate should reject his nomination. After we learned that President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh as his pick, you said that the Senate should reject him. Why?
I think the Senate should reject him for a variety of reasons. One, Mr. Kavanaugh, he might be a brilliant man, and I have no doubt about his intelligence and intellect. I think the idea that he is a moderate stabilizing force for the Supreme Court is just not true. This is somebody that has been in the heart of some of the biggest and most polarizing legal debates we've seen, from his time working for Ken Starr in the impeachment of President Clinton, through Bush v. Gore, and as an aide to a Bush White House. And so as we see the potential for Mitch McConnell to reset and to solidify not a right of center Supreme Court, but a hard right Supreme Court for potentially decades in the future, I think the Senate needs to get clear answers from Justice Kavanaugh about how he views such things such as affirmative action, gay marriage, clearly a woman's right to choose and access to women's health care, confidentiality. And that he's not just going to hide behind this idea of upholding precedent. Most nominees for the Supreme Court say so. And several of them just voted to overturn Supreme Court precedent 2 weeks ago in a number of decisions, particularly the Janus one. So to the senators there that say, hey, as long as he offers us some reassuring word about standing up for precedent, those are code words that don't necessarily hold. And so one, I think on the substance, the Senate should be very, very careful about and do some digging about who he is, how he's going to rule. And I think, at least my understanding of that record leads me to believe it is not a tempered one, it is not a moderate one. Two, it is hard for me to divorce the fact that we are in the midst of an election cycle at the moment. We are about 4 months out from midterm elections that are going to be some of the most polarizing ones we have seen. And to take Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell at his word that you don't nominate somebody in the course of an election cycle, and that is what he did and broke Supreme Court precedent, American government precedent, and not giving Judge Garland even a hearing for his nomination put forth by Barack Obama 11 months or so before an election. It's blatant hypocrisy. It smacks of pure political power, and a political agenda to try to solidify a hard conservative bent on a Supreme Court when, on a number of these issues, the views and attitudes of the American public are trending the other way. And this is, I think, a blatant attempt by the Republican Majority Leader to impose a view on the highest court for, again, potentially decades that is not reflective of the view of the American public. And I don't think that's right.
Well, you bring up a good point about midterms, because we know that there are a lot of Democratic senators running for re-election in states that Trump won. And then on the Republican side, there's Murkowski and Collins, who are both pro-choice Republicans, but have not indicated how they would vote on Kavanaugh. So are you worried that midterms will significantly influence what happens with his nomination?
Absolutely. Look, I don't think as you get as Congress inches closer and closer to these midterms, and understand that the House of Representatives is in session this week, next week, and then we recess until we come back in September, in which case we're about 2 months before these elections. They're going to be ramped up. It's going to be an extremely polarized political environment. To put in the midst of that one of the largest responsibilities that the Senate has in terms of the hearings on the Supreme Court justices and the confirmation battle, given how tight and divided these races are, you're going to get in the midst of the political atmosphere, which, again, was the rationale for Mitch McConnell to say that you don't do this 10 months before an election. We're not even going to give somebody a hearing in February. We're going to be in the midst of these confirmation hearings. They haven't noticed a date yet, but September, late August, September, or potentially even October for a November election. It's blatant hypocrisy.
Well, there was definitely a lot of concern expressed about the future of Roe versus Wade once we learned of his nomination. So is that a concern that you share? Do you
Yes.
think that the future of Roe versus Wade could be drastically different if he's nominated?
Yes. So there's no debate about that. So that is at risk. That is at stake, period. There, I think, will be some questions from the Senate as to his views on the underlying case there. When he was asked about that before for his confirmation to the bench, he basically said, I stand by abiding Supreme Court precedent. I'm not going to tell you what my internal views on that case are. Fine, but we just saw the court again overturn Supreme Court precedent. So when you're talking about a case that has become such a fabric of American society as a woman's right to make decisions over her own body and her own health care, and to make sure that government is not coming between her and her doctor. The idea that this could be done by this could be overturned by essentially 5 justices on a Supreme Court under a very political process after the political obstruction, the likes of which we have not seen in modern times. I think all of us should be concerned, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. And to my Republican colleagues, if you're rooting for this outcome, think for a minute about how you might feel if the roles here were reversed, and that a value that you held dearly was potentially going to be overturned because of a blatant, crass political maneuvering by a Democratic leader.